The Galactic Senate was a place of laws, diplomacy, and carefully measured words, but beneath the polite facade, it was a battlefield. Every species in attendance wore some form of armor, ceremonial or practical. The reptilian Threx wore their plated exoskeletons reinforced with kinetic barriers. The massive Hervian warlords draped themselves in gravity-dampening alloy to prevent their hulking bodies from shattering the chamber floors. Even the feathered Zalari, the so-called peaceful diplomats, wrapped themselves in energy-diffusing robes, a passive acknowledgement of the ever-present threat of violence. Yet among them the humans sat unarmored. It was not an oversight. It was not arrogance. It was a message. Ambassador Elias Vance adjusted his simple suit, smoothing the fabric as he leaned back in his chair. His posture was relaxed, his breathing slow. Across from him, Supreme Minister Katha of the Zalari clicked her beak in disapproval. "Ambassador Vance," she said, her voice layered with synthetic translation, "the Senate would like to remind you once again that personal armor is encouraged for a reason. You leave yourself exposed." Vance smirked. "I appreciate the concern, Minister Katha, but I assure you I feel perfectly safe." The chamber rustled with whispers. Some scoffed, others observed in uneasy silence. The reason why no one forced the humans to comply was well known, but no one dared to say it outright. Because to do so would be to acknowledge that humanity had no need for armor. Not because they were invincible. Not because they were foolish. But because in every recorded instance where a Senate dispute had turned violent, it was the humans who walked away unscathed, while the aggressors left in body bags. It had happened too many times to be called coincidence. And now it was about to happen again. The Grand Chamber of the Senate was enormous, a circular coliseum with raised seats for each species. A podium stood at the center where speakers presented their arguments. Today's debate was supposed to be about trade rights along the newly discovered hyperlane Delta 12. But things had taken a dangerous turn. The Korthan Dominion, a brutal, expansionist empire, had been granted a seat at the table in a controversial diplomatic effort. Their representative, Warlord Vashak, was a towering brute covered in dark metallic plating. His glowing red eyes locked onto Vance as he stood to speak. "The Dominion finds these proceedings a waste of time," Vashak growled, his voice deep and guttural. "Why should we barter with words when we can take what we want?" The chamber fell silent. The Korthan had long been considered a menace, but they had never been reckless enough to make such a direct threat on the Senate floor. Vance sighed, rubbing his temples. "Warlord Vashak, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but that's not how things are done here." The warlord sneered. "Not for long." With a swift, calculated movement, Vashak lifted his arm. His armor hissed as built-in weapons activated. A pulse cannon formed from the plates along his forearm, energy crackling as it charged. A collective gasp swept the chamber. Some senators leapt back, activating personal shields. The Zalari guards reached for their weapons, too slowly. But Vance didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Vashak hesitated. A split-second delay, barely perceptible, but it was there. The warlord had expected fear. Panic. The scrambling of a helpless diplomat. Instead, he saw a man looking at him like he was an inconvenience. And that's when the warlord made his second mistake. He fired. A blast of red energy erupted from his cannon, streaking toward Vance. The senators screamed. And then, nothing. The energy dissipated mid-air. Not from a shield. Not from any visible defense. It was as if the very fabric of reality had rejected the attack. Vashak took a step back, his breathing uneven. His species did not feel fear easily, but now his instincts screamed at him. Vance stood. Slowly. Deliberately. He walked toward Vashak, unhurried, his footsteps echoing through the silent chamber. "You should have done your research, warlord." His voice was calm, but it carried weight. The warlord raised his arm again, attempting to fire a second shot. Nothing happened. The weapon was offline. Systems scrambled. Vance tilted his head. "That armor of yours, it's impressive. But tell me, have you ever fought against a species that wrote the rules of modern warfare?" Vashak bared his fangs, but now it was forced. "You are bluffing." Vance took another step forward. "Am I?" The lights flickered. The chamber's security barriers powered down. The senators turned to their consoles in alarm. Their emergency escape systems were locked. The entire Senate chamber was now under human control. Vance smiled. "You see, warlord, while you were busy crafting armor, humanity mastered something far more powerful." He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small, innocuous device. "We don't rely on brute force." He pressed a button. Every system in Vashak's armor shut down. The kinetic shields collapsed. The exosuit servos locked up. He fell to his knees with a loud clang, immobilized. Vance crouched slightly, meeting the warlord's burning gaze. "We don't wear armor because we don't need it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because when the fighting really starts, we're not the ones who should be afraid." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some senators scrambled for exits. Others stared in stunned silence. Vashak was still struggling, but it was useless. His empire's greatest war technology, crippled with the press of a button. Vance turned and walked back to his seat. He sat down, crossing his legs as if nothing had happened. He gestured toward the trembling Zalari minister Katha. "Now where were we?" Yes. Trade rights. Shall we continue?" No one objected. The humans had made their point. Again. For a full minute no one spoke. The Senate chamber, once a hub of constant debate and whispered deals, was now filled with nothing but stunned silence. The senators, some standing, others frozen in their seats, stared at the kneeling form of Warlord Vashak, his once imposing armor now little more than a prison. Vance exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the Senate desk. He had been through this before. Different warlords, different threats, same outcome. Humanity had no need for armor, not because they were unprotected, but because anyone foolish enough to strike first learned a simple, brutal lesson. You never truly get a second chance. Minister Katha, the Zalari diplomat, cleared her throat. "Ambassador Vance," she began cautiously. "I trust there is a reasonable explanation for what just transpired?" Vance offered a calm smile. "A Korthan warlord just attempted to assassinate a member of the Senate, in direct violation of galactic law." He gestured to the immobilized Vashak. "We merely ensured the incident ended, predictably." A low murmur spread through the assembly. Predictably. That was the part that unsettled them most. Because every time someone threatened a human in the Senate, the result was the same. Vance had seen this play out before. First, there was the denial, the disbelief that the humans, so unassuming in appearance, were the most untouchable species in the room. Then came the fear. Not the immediate knee-jerk terror of a predator baring its fangs, but the slow, creeping realization that humans weren't reacting to danger. They were anticipating it. They had already prepared countermeasures and they never felt the need to announce them. "You shut down his armor," Minister Katha pressed, tilting her head, feathers ruffling. "How?" Vance shrugged. "Classified." A low growl rumbled from another side of the chamber. "You do not get to say that, human," snapped Chancellor Urdox of the Threx Dominion. His reptilian form shifted under thick plates of organic armor, his claws tapping against his Senate desk. "You flaunt power you refuse to acknowledge, yet you expect us to remain silent?" His golden eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation tactic. This is supremacy." Vance leaned forward. "No," he said, voice steady. "This is balance." He let the word sink in. "You think we are hoarding power?" he continued. "That we're hiding secrets because we wish to dominate?" He gestured to the frozen warlord. "Let me remind you what just happened. We were attacked. And instead of retaliating with force, we simply turned him off. No blood spilled. No destruction." He spread his hands. "If humans truly wished for supremacy, don't you think we'd be wearing armor too?" Silence. That was the problem, wasn't it? The idea that humans weren't merely refusing to wear armor, but that they genuinely didn't need it, it shook them in ways no one wanted to admit. The other species wore armor as a shield against violence, a precaution against treachery. But humans sat among them in nothing but fabric, unafraid, as if violence itself was already contained. As if it wasn't something they feared, but something they controlled. Vance folded his hands on the table. "Now, are we here to discuss trade rights? Or do we need to have another lesson in why starting fights with humans is a very bad idea?" The unspoken rule. The Senate session ended 2 hours later. The trade dispute was settled, though no one truly cared about the outcome anymore. The real event had been what transpired between humanity and the Korthan warlord. As the senators filed out, Vance remained seated, watching as the Zalari security officers carried away Vashak. His armor was still unresponsive, his systems scrambled. The once mighty warlord had been reduced to little more than a paralyzed statue. Vance felt no satisfaction, only inevitability. "This is why they fear you." He turned his head. Minister Katha stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Vance smirked. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She flicked her feathers. "It is unnatural for a species to behave as you do. Every civilization here learned the same lesson. Survival requires defense. But humans, she studied him. You don't defend. Vance raised an eyebrow. You think we don't defend ourselves? Katha shook her head. No. I think you've learned to wage war without looking like you're waging war. You let your enemies attack first, and then you remind them why that was a mistake. Vance didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. The Zalari diplomat exhaled. This is why humans are feared. Not because of your ships. Not because of your weapons. But because you sit here without armor and every species knows, she lowered her voice, that if we ever turned against you, it wouldn't be a war. It would be an execution. Vance leaned back in his seat, smiling ever so slightly. Minister, he said, I think you understand us better than most. Katha stared at him for a moment longer. Then, with a flutter of her robes, she walked away, leaving Vance alone in the empty chamber. He checked his watch, stretching slightly. One more lesson had been taught today. And he had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. Vance walked through the dimly lit halls of the Galactic Senate, hands in his pockets, his stride unhurried. He had been in situations like this more times than he could count, yet it never ceased to amuse him how different species reacted. The silence, the stolen glances, the way security personnel subtly adjusted their postures as he passed. Not a single being in the Senate hall had spoken out in direct opposition to humanity since Vashak's humiliating collapse. Oh, the bureaucrats would bluster, the politicians would posture, but deep down they all understood a simple, undeniable truth. You don't pick a fight with humans. Not because humans were the strongest. Not because they had the most advanced weapons. But because every species that had ever crossed humanity had vanished. Not in an open war. Not in a massive display of destruction. They simply stopped existing. And no one could prove humanity was behind it. A meeting in the shadows. Vance stopped outside his quarters. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit room. He stepped inside, pausing only when he sensed movement in the corner. He didn't turn around. Is this the part where you try to intimidate me? He asked, setting his data slate on the desk. A voice, deep and rasping, filled the room. That would be pointless. Vance turned. A figure loomed in the shadows, a Threx enforcer clad in combat armor designed for assassination. His reptilian eyes glowed faintly, and his claws flexed razor-sharp. Vance took in the sight, unimpressed. Let me guess. Chancellor Urdok sent you? The Threx stepped forward. I'm not here for threats. I am here for understanding. Vance smirked. You're here because your people don't get it. Because every time someone tries to pressure humanity, they fail and no one can explain why. The Threx's jaw tightened. No species should hold this much power in secret. Vance leaned against his desk. And yet here we are. The enforcer hesitated. I need to know. Why don't you strike first? Vance exhaled slowly. He had been asked this before. Aliens thought it was arrogance. Or a twisted sense of honor. It was neither. You misunderstand the very foundation of how humans think, Vance said. Other species fight for dominance. Or for survival. But humans? We don't fight unless we have to. He stepped closer, voice lowering. But when we do, we don't stop. The Threx studied him. Is that a threat? Vance chuckled. No. It's history. A lesson from the past. The enforcer folded his arms. Then tell me, what happens if we push humanity too far? Vance tilted his head. You really want to know? He picked up his data slate, tapped a few commands and projected a holographic image into the air. It was an old star map filled with names and borders, civilizations that had once existed. He zoomed in on a sector that was now nothing but empty space. This used to be the Vrontak Dominion, Vance said. They tried to enslave humans a century ago. He flicked his fingers, shifting the projection. This was the Marik Alliance. They decided humanity was a threat to galactic stability, and launched a preemptive war. He tapped again. And this? This was the Valis Imperium. They thought our ships were weak. So they attacked first. The Threx's eyes darkened. Where are they now? Vance smiled. That's the thing, isn't it? There were no ruins. No recorded battles. No lingering remnants of their fleets. Just silence. Some say they were wiped out, Vance continued. Others think they vanished. He locked eyes with the enforcer. But no one has ever found evidence tying us to their destruction. The Threx hesitated. You're saying humans commit genocide? Vance shook his head. No, he set down the data slate. I'm saying that once someone tries to exterminate us, they lose the ability to tell their side of the story. The enforcer took a slow step back. He understood now. It wasn't that humans wouldn't strike first. It was that humans made sure no one ever got a second chance. Vance walked past him, pausing only briefly at the door. "If I were you," he said quietly, "I'd tell your people to stop wondering about our secrets, and start focusing on keeping your own species alive." The door slid open. The enforcer stood there, frozen, as Vance stepped into the corridor and disappeared into the crowd. And that is why they never wear armor. Later that night, in a secured chamber deep beneath the Senate halls, Chancellor Urdox of the Threx Dominion received a single transmission from his enforcer. 2 words. "Do not." Urdox frowned. "Do not what?" he demanded. But there was no response. Only silence. The same silence that had erased so many before. Chancellor Urdox sat in his dimly lit chambers, the weight of the enforcer's last message pressing against his mind. "Do not." 2 words. Nothing more. He had sent one of his most elite operatives to confront the human delegate, to gauge their hidden strength, to determine what, if anything, gave humanity the quiet, immovable confidence that sent shivers through the halls of the Senate. And now his enforcer was missing. No body. No signs of struggle. Gone. The silence stretched out, an unspoken warning. Something was deeply wrong with the way humans operated. Urdox had spent decades maneuvering through the shadows of galactic politics. He had overseen the rise and fall of empires, orchestrated assassinations, and even crushed rebellions before they had begun. But this was different. This was a game where humanity had never needed to move a single piece. They didn't react. They didn't posture. They simply existed, and the rest of the galaxy bent around them. The Chancellor's claws drummed against his desk, his mind racing. He needed more information. If his enforcer was lost, then another operative would have to retrieve the truth. Before he could issue the order, a notification flickered onto his display. "Incoming transmission, unknown source." His spines tensed. No one should have been able to contact this channel. It was encrypted beyond any known slicer's capabilities. And yet, the message had arrived. With a slow breath, he accepted the transmission. A figure appeared in the hologram, Vance. The human was relaxed, leaning against a desk, hands clasped as if this were a casual chat. "Urdox," he said smoothly, "I figured you'd be waiting for an update." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "What did you do to my enforcer?" Vance tilted his head. "Wouldn't you rather ask what he did?" Urdox bared his fangs. "You expect me to believe he simply vanished?" The human's expression didn't change. "Believe whatever makes you sleep at night." Urdox's patience was razor thin. "You're playing a dangerous game, human?" Vance chuckled, shaking his head. "That's the mistake everyone keeps making. You think this is a game." His voice dropped. "It's not." The room seemed to darken around Urdox. "Let me ask you something, Chancellor," Vance continued. "How many times have you schemed against humans? How many times has the Senate tried to put pressure on us? To manipulate us?" Urdox's silence was answer enough. "And yet every time you hesitate before making the final move," Vance said. "Why is that?" The Chancellor's breath was slow, controlled. Because fear gnawed at him. Not the fear of war, he had seen war. Led wars. But this was different. This was the fear of something that couldn't be understood. Something that existed in the shadows of history, unrecorded, undisturbed. Something human. "Every empire that has crossed humanity has disappeared," Vance continued, his voice calm. "And yet there's never been a grand battle. No official records of extermination." He leaned forward. "Why do you think that is?" Urdox clenched his jaw. "Because you erased the evidence." Vance grinned. "Or maybe, we don't need to." The Chancellor stiffened. The meaning behind those words was suffocating. Vance continued, his tone casual, yet carrying the weight of something far more dangerous. "Tell me, Urdox, do you know why humans don't wear armor in the Senate chambers?" The Chancellor's voice came out low. "Tell me." Vance's smirk faded, replaced with something colder. "Because we never need protection." A silence stretched between them, deeper than before. Urdox's mind raced. No armor. No defenses. Because no one would dare attack them. Not because they were invincible. But because whoever tried, would never have the chance to tell the story. Vance straightened. "I think we're done here. If I were you, I'd take your enforcer's last message seriously." The transmission flickered. But before it cut out entirely, Vance spoke one last time. "Do not." Then the screen went dark. The last mistake the galaxy never made. For 3 cycles the Chancellor did nothing. No orders were set. No further attempts to investigate the humans were made. And for the first time in decades, Erdox truly understood restraint. The Senate never heard of his enforcer again. No one dared to bring it up. And from that day forward, when humans walked into the Senate chambers, unarmored, unprotected, no species so much as looked at them the wrong way. Because by then, every member of the Senate had learned the most important rule of all. You don't test humanity's patience. You never, ever push them too far. Because if you do, history won't remember you existed. Subscribe now, before the last lesson you ever learn is why humans don't need armor.